This information is compiled from many sources. If there is anything incorrect, please leave your comments in the comment section. Global Insights will receive and correct it. Now let's get to the point. Taiwan's skies, under the watch of a high-tech air defense system and at a temple in the north of the island. Armored vehicles and tanks are ready for their next move. They are taking part in exercises in a simulated situation of being attacked by China. The move comes as Taiwan watches China's Navy conduct its own drills. Beijing's warships and drones have surrounded the island. China typically conducts combat readiness patrols once a week. Yesterday, March 23, 2025, was a bit special. Early in the morning, Chinese warships approached within 24 nautical miles and did not leave. And in the afternoon, the Air Force appeared. Taiwan said that from 6 a.m. on March 17 to 6 a.m. on March 18, 59 Chinese aircraft, 19 warships, and 2 balloons flew around Taiwan. Of these, 43 crossed the median line, the unofficial boundary of the Taiwan Strait, and entered Taiwan's northern, central, southwestern, and eastern air defense identification zones. The island felt the danger was growing. Last week, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense announced that 2027 could be the year China first attacks the island. But what if I told you that as a major economic, diplomatic, and military power, Beijing has other ways to conquer Taiwan without firing a shot? Taiwan's first problem is that it is limited in natural resources. Compared to other economies, the island is very dependent on trade. Figures for 2022 show that imports and exports accounted for 61% and 69% of the island's GDP, respectively. The only economy more dependent on trade is the Netherlands, with imports accounting for 70% and exports for 76% of GDP. By comparison, imports and exports account for only 15% and 20% of China's GDP, respectively. Worse, Taiwan imports at least 97% of its energy, making it one of the least energy-reliant economies. To make matters worse, Taiwan's reserves are very low. Its crude oil reserves are only enough for 5 months, coal for 1 month, and natural gas for electricity production for about 2 weeks. More important than electricity production, Taiwan must ensure that its people have enough food. However, the island imports 70% of its food, a dependence that is increasing as the Taiwanese diet becomes more diverse. If imports were cut, Taiwan's food reserves would last about 12 months. Like a coin with two sides, the island's geography provides natural defenses, but also has disadvantages. Unlike Ukraine, Taiwan cannot receive supplies across its land border. In the eyes of mainland policymakers, this is a weakness worth exploiting. Imagine if China's Navy and Air Force didn't even have to fire a shot. They only need to deploy a large army to surround the island to cut off Taiwan's economic and military links with the outside world. A blockade would cut off the trade, energy, and resources needed to sustain Taiwan's economy and population of nearly 24 million. Assuming China can close Taiwan off for an extended period of time, they could force the island to surrender. Second, Beijing could try a gray zone tactic. You have to know that conflicts have 50 shades, from the quiet, invisible to the undeniably extreme. But there's also a so-called gray zone that lies at the far end of the scale. Suppose some incident occurs in the Taiwan Strait, Beijing could use it as a springboard to launch a gray zone blockade, under the guise of a humanitarian mission or some kind of law enforcement operation. This is a tactic that China has been using tirelessly in the South China Sea. Beijing creates a gray zone by sending warships disguised as fishing boats so that soldiers disguised as fishermen can land on some islands in order to contest and realize the illegal 9-line claim. In the case of Taiwan, China could establish a quarantine zone around Taiwan, setting conditions for who can enter and leave it. This would force companies and governments to comply with China's terms, and thus they would successfully undermine Taiwan's sovereignty claims. Importantly, unlike an attack, a gray zone blockade is unlikely to be considered an act of war. This is important because it would be harder for the U.S. to intervene militarily if the Chinese Coast Guard led the mission rather than the Navy. Law enforcement and civilian vessels would play a key role in this scenario. The Coast Guard and maritime militia would act as ambushes. Imagine that China first publicly announced that it would conduct customs inspections of all cargo and oil ships entering Taiwan. The Chinese Coast Guard would be allowed to board the ships for on-site inspections and to question the crew. Companies that don't comply will have their market access revoked. This approach may seem harmless at first glance. After all, you just have to submit paperwork and get through. However, if Taiwan complies, it will lose the sovereignty it claims and gradually surrender. Cutting Taiwan's trade by 50% would be detrimental enough, especially if China cut off energy imports, leaving the island without power. China wouldn't even need to blockade the entire island. Taiwan has only a few deep-water ports which Chinese forces will target first. Chinese Coast Guard vessels can enter Taiwan's 24 nautical mile contiguous zone, but not its 12 nautical mile territorial waters. In this way, Beijing sends a message that it does not recognize Taiwan's claims to those boundaries. To supplement the Coast Guard, China could deploy fishing vessels, essentially maritime militia. However, these would not be allowed to board or inspect commercial vessels. Their job would be to fill the gaps between Coast Guard fleets. These civilian vessels would rotate throughout the blockade area, thereby disrupting Taiwan's perception of boundaries. Further out at sea, the Chinese Navy would deploy carrier strike groups and surface combat groups to the island's echelons. The People's Liberation Army, PLA, has trained for exactly this scenario. In previous exercises, each group has had 3 to 6 vessels, including destroyers, frigates, support vessels, amphibious ships, and even aircraft carriers. While enforcing the blockade, manned and unmanned aircraft will patrol around the island, an activity the PLA has repeatedly practiced in recent years. The purpose of these naval and air force formations is to intimidate Taiwan's forces and deter outside intervention. If Taiwan responds to the blockade and mobilizes its forces to directly clash with China's Coast Guard, it will give the other side an excuse to escalate tensions. Beijing will launch an all-out war, and Taiwan may not win. And finally, let's say option number 2 isn't enough to force Taiwan to make concessions. Beijing could then escalate the situation and send its navy to lead the charge. But putting expensive warships in the crosshairs of Taiwan's coastal anti-ship missiles is not a good idea. So naval vessels will keep a distance of 150 kilometers from Taiwan's coast to avoid being hit. From this distance, the Navy can establish control of the sea and provide intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance support. At closer ranges, the PLA will intensify its gray zone tactics. For example, submarines could secretly deploy mines at the entrances to Taiwan's major ports and energy facilities. Cargo ships and aircraft that illegally enter the blockade would first be warned, then punished if they did not comply. Insurance premiums in the area would then skyrocket to the point where shipping companies could cut off traffic to Taiwan altogether. Further, to show off its power, the PLA missile force could hold exercises. With 1,800 conventional missiles, China has one of the world's largest arsenals of toys. Taiwan is within the sights of these goods, but in a blockade scenario, they would be used to prevent intervention by outside forces. From within the mainland, China could launch a devastating attack on Taiwan's financial and communication systems. The island would be cut off from the rest of the world. But to isolate it even more effectively, Beijing would have to look to the seabed. Taiwan's internet service relies on more than a dozen undersea cables. China could disrupt these lines. In this day and age, if you're not on the internet, you don't exist. But Taiwan could turn to low-orbit satellite internet instead. It recently signed a contract with French satellite company EchoSat. The problem is that the bandwidth would be too low to be of military use. Beijing could exploit this, mounting an information campaign to fuel discontent among the island's population and create chaos from within. In short, with its massive power, China could close the door on Taiwan, although it would take months for negotiations to reach a final outcome. For Beijing, that is better than opening fire. But don't underestimate Taiwan. If it holds out and somehow manages to get allies to back it, China will have a hard time forcing the island to surrender without using force. Then the blockade could escalate into a full-blown conflict, and we won't know what will happen next. I just want the world to be peaceful, safe, and happy. And I am happy. What do you think? Will the world be peaceful anymore? Leave your opinion in the comments section. Now, goodbye, and see you again.